everybody. My name is Jacek Bartosiak. Welcome to Strategy and Future. And today is the exceptional guest, John C. Wright, the author of great book, Deep Space Warfare, the Lieutenant Colonel of U.S. Air Force base stationed in Guam. Hello, John.
Hello, Jacek. Thank you for having me here today.
Okay, I'll start right away our conversation from with showing the book. I hope it's visible. Yeah, this is the book, and it's a must-read for everybody interested in space, but also in the all-coming wars between peer competitors on Earth, on our beautiful Terra. Although this book is exceptional for one particular reason. This book takes a reader deep into space and conceptualizes in line with what before Mahan, Corbett wrote about the naval warfare. It conceptualizes on deep space warfare, even amphibious assault on other planets and meeting other civilizations. John, how come did you start writing this book? What happened? You were the U.S. Air Force officer. What happened that you embarked on this journey?
Well, I got interested in space like most people when I was very young. It's a fascinating topic. It's very important for the history of our planet, our lovely planet, because it's the next biggest thing. Personally, I believe that humanity is headed for a new age of exploration, similar to the 15th and 16th century. But along with that comes a lot of political conflict. And I don't believe that what I've read with space and what I've been reading about before I wrote this, I don't believe it really addressed the international politics of what we're going to face even from just low Earth orbit and all the way to deep space. So I decided to start thinking about it, and those thoughts became written down, and pretty soon it became a book.
Yeah, how long did you write this book? Because I think that privately when we talked, you mentioned that you started 4 years ago. You published it this year, and in the meantime, there is a growing competition in space, new space, moon exploration race, and so on and so forth.
Yes. I think I've got very lucky with the timing. I did start writing it in about 2016, and I finished in 2018, and it came out at the very end of 2019, around October. So about a year it's been out now. And I don't know if that's a good or bad thing that all of the space competition has helped the book out. But yes, I do hope that folks that work with that every day are at least referencing it from time to time.
And to even interest our audience more in this book, I will just enumerate a few chapters.
Okay.
Interstellar basics, conflict, tyranny of distance, logistical impacts on fighting hostile environments, automated assault forces, hazards of disunity, space dominance, and so on. So what I notice as a peculiar thing, and at the same time quietly understandable, is that this is not a science fiction book, of course. It's a strategic book written by a savvy strategist who thinks in terms of space, and in case of outer space, it's more of the volume and logistical line, how you really sustain forces, which is quite a challenge in outer space, considerably bigger than in the world ocean on our planet. And step by step, it is being explained in this book. This I find actually quite appealing. A must-read for everybody interested in space warfare. And as you properly stated, not only on the low Earth orbit, but far away from Earth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for that observation. Yeah, it's funny. Space is one of those things where once you get started, there's almost no reason to not keep going, because essentially every new area past the last one, for example, geosynchronous orbit after low Earth orbit, everything becomes a new high ground, if you will. So there's almost no reason not to think about it. And it's conceptually, we have no idea what it's actually going to be like, but conceptually we can start thinking now. And I think that was one of the goals of the book.
Yeah, so when Donald Trump was announcing establishment of the U.S. Space Force last year in December, he told that the United States needs an ultimate domain, high ground, final high ground, whatever he phrased it.
Sure.
But this is all about it. But of course, mostly he meant low Earth orbit and maybe other Earth orbits. Yeah? But let's explain to the audience, what is the ultimate high ground if you think about domination of Earth? Is it moon? What is, let's get deeper into space.
So if you wanted to control the Earth the best, where would you go? Well, nearby the moon would be good for sure, but it wouldn't be everything. My personal belief that it's the space between the moon and our next sister planet there, Venus. I think I allude to the book a lot about that analogy you mentioned between amphibious warfare and planetary warfare. So really, if you want to dominate a planet, it's the same as any other island in an ocean. You know, it's a blockade. It's a total control of the space around it. We are not really at a point yet where we need low Earth orbit and geosynchronous orbit stuff. So there will come a day when every country will need to have that stuff. GPS satellites, satellites that enhance communication. So we use those things now, and they're very good and they're convenient, but they're not yet required for national survival. So one day when that does happen, that's when I think the area in right around the planet are going to be exceptionally important, and it's either defend it or go down. So that's kind of how I probably approach that question.
So you don't belong to the group of people that other people in the space called utopians that claim that it's like the Antarctic, that it should be no man's land, no man's space, and we should share the common destiny of humanity by sharing all the fruits and challenges of space. You don't believe in this approach, John?
It's very romantic, and I wish I could, but unfortunately, the way I see things, human nature, I just don't think it's possible. In the book, I do mention a little bit about meshing international philosophy, or political philosophy, excuse me, with space warfare. And to me, it's just another battlefield, a place for international competition. And I think a lot of people haven't really thought about it in the future, or if they have, it's been in the context of maybe a science fiction show where everybody is magically connected, politically. I really do think it's going to be a nation-state competition in the future. No, sadly, I don't think it's going to be kumbaya and very happy, at least for a while. Perhaps in the future, but not right away. Yeah.
I mean, the human record would concur with you, so to speak.
Unfortunately, yes.
Unfortunately. So, what would be the trigger then when we move the humans as as fighters, as soldiers into space? Because so far we have automated systems in mostly low Earth orbit. Yeah, I mean in terms of the warfighting capabilities. Yeah,
right.
What would be the trigger that people will get there to battle stations or something? What
Sure.
Transformation? When will the transformation occur, and why?
What we're going to need first, I think, is a sort of economic viability first. So something to defend, if you will. Right now, what we're defending by putting all of our stuff in low Earth orbit, as you mentioned, most of our stuff is in low Earth orbit. I mean, that's where the majority of satellites and things we put in space are. And those defend two-dimensional countries here on the surface of the Earth. And they do that very well, and it's very important. But until we have something else up there, for example, asteroid mining, for example, there's an unbelievable amount of wealth locked in not only just the asteroid belt, but just rocks between ourselves and the moon. Believe it or not, there are things up there. And the moon itself, of course, that is the next target for any kind of permanent military installation or human habitation experiment. Once there is something permanent that is basically making money, I think is going to be the trigger for requiring physical protection. And I do think that countries are going to have a choice to make. We did talk in the book. We talked a little bit about I talked a little about automated forces and the pros and cons versus automation and actual human habitation. And each nation state, I think, is going to have to make a decision on what they want to base whatever forces they place permanently in space on that, and that will make a difference on how risky they become. So personally, I think it's going to be something that we like a mine that's very valuable, or some sort of corporate effort that requires protection is going to be the first step.
So what are the critical pivotal points in our solar system that will be worth defending, or where the new economy will be important, and then it will need to be protected? What do you think? Yeah. What is your guess?
Ooh, good question. So it's very hard to, I have some ideas, but it's very hard to conceptualize this because the solar system is not like a map, like for example, between the space between Poland and Germany, where you can tell where each river, forest, and mountain are in each strategic place. But I think the first thing that comes to mind is between the Earth and the Moon, there's a series of places that you've probably already are familiar with called Lagrange points. Maybe you're not familiar with this.
Liberation points. So,
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's the one. Okay, so there's 4 of those main ones, and of the 4, I think there's 5. So of the 5 that are important are, I think, L4 and 5 that are termed in the scientific community, and those are essentially free astrosynchronous points. You can put whatever you want there, and it'll float there forever, essentially, in the same spot. So it's significant in that it saves a lot of money and energy and resupply, of course, if you don't have to keep firing thrusters to keep something in the right spot. And it's also a very strategic point from the perspective of the Earth, because it's right there. It doesn't seem close right now, but someday it will be, the perfect standoff distance for an adversary to do whatever they want to a nation on Earth. So that's the first real step. And that would, of course, those 2 spots and really all the Lagrange points would command the Moon, of course. And whoever would be on the Moon would be essentially beholden to whoever owns those Lagrange points. And so really nation states who get there first have to decide if they want to put hotels there or military bases. And, I made my guess. Yeah, what's that?
Resupply bases with military.
My guess absolutely is military and logistic resupply, I suppose, is going to be my guess. But this will probably all happen after I'm dead, but at the same time, that's probably what's going to be first. Beyond that will really depend on what has been discovered economically. And that's where that age of exploration idea is so important. Not every rock has something valuable, and the asteroid belt is rather large. I don't think there's a whole lot of potential for human settlement inside the solar system. It could happen if people want to do that. For example, mining operations or some sort of military outpost, like in those Lagrange points. But for the most part, we're looking at the Moon and potentially Mars. Of course, everyone likes to talk about Mars. I mentioned Mars a little bit in the book. Not only has it been captured by the science fiction, community and in their imagination, but there really are physical advantages to choosing that as a place. For one, it's not a gas giant; you can actually build things on it. The rotation is about the same as the Earth, so there wouldn't be too much physical discomfort for people that live there. Of course, logistically, it's very, very complicated, but it's also around. It's a good halfway point between here and the asteroid belt, which would go back to our economic discussion. So. That's kind of at first. After the asteroid belt, brother, I think all bets are off. I really don't know what's going to happen. It's going to take us quite a bit of technology we still require to really be able to go freely back and forth and at such distances. For now, it's very, very hard. But that's my initial thought.
Yeah, I understand. So the inner solar system up to the asteroid belts, and there are possibilities for mining and critical pivotal points like choke points on Earth, like Malacca or Gibraltar. So we have Lagrange points,
right,
back and forth. There are also the liberation Lagrange points between Earth and Sun. That could protect Earth from some alien invasion, maybe, or some objects that can destroy our Mother Earth. Yes, have you considered that in your book as well?
I didn't get into the actual tactical points in the solar system. No, I mean, there are a lot of Lagrange points, period. Like it's an idea that happens that naturally occurs between the gravitational forces of several different floating bodies. So yeah, you're absolutely right. They would be important. One thing I did get into though is that it's kind of along these same lines is electromagnetic hiding. So in space, you know, unlike say on the ocean or somewhere else on land, for example, visual recognition of enemy forces or finding things via your eye or a really good telescope really isn't that useful. There's a whole lot of space in space, of course. And so when it comes to tactical deception and placement, what we're really dealing with, I think, is an ability to hide in the electromagnetic spectrum. And some things that offer that, the example I bring up in the book is Saturn, for example. I'm not familiar with what kind of Lagrange points are available at Saturn, but we do know just from the great work that the people from Cassini did on that project, that there are several different electromagnetic things going on inside Saturn's main orbit and its areas immediately around the planet itself. So we know that unless a type of signals intelligence gathering system, a sensor, if it's not calibrated to take that into account, a ship or many ships or many things can be hidden essentially electromagnetically and in plain sight is what it would be, because if you actually flew out there and looked around out a window, you could see whatever you wanted. But the distances are so great that visual recognition is going to be almost useless, unlike say in the air where we, us pilots are trained to visually recognize things. It would be almost pointless in space just because of the distances. So I think when it comes to tactical deception in space, the signals intelligence is the name of the game, and electromagnetics, the spectrum itself has to be, I think, better manipulated in ways we have not yet studied or have tried. And I think that's important.
Yeah, so I understand that electromagnetic warfare, both offensively, like and defensively, camouflage or spoofing and so on, right? And also hiding.
Exactly. Yep.
Interesting. And how would you describe the tyranny of distance? How would that change the grammar of warfare?
Essentially, what I would describe it as is everything becomes more risky and more expensive and less flexible. So when a nation state is going to commit to a military operation in the future, they really commit to it. It's a very, I think it's going to be, at least initially, a very all or nothing kind of operations in space. Basically, once an expedition or a fleet is prepared and launched, at that point, it's going to be a lot like it used to be in the age of sail here on Earth, in that local commanders are going to have all kinds of authority. Not going to be a whole lot of communication back and forth between headquarters. They're going to have a lot of power. They're going to have a lot of very important decisions to make. And there's going to be things that happen during the middle of voyages that are going to be hard to deal with. And there's not going to be a lot of assistance or help in the middle of space. So things are going to take a long time, and they're going to be very expensive. And I think they're going to be just harder than anything we've ever really done militarily. I don't think we're quite ready for the scale, the logistic scale required for anything. I mean, even the most minor expedition to Mars right now is baffling, you know, in terms of monetary requirements and distance and time. And a lot of people, you know, what doesn't help is these distances in space are not intuitive to the human mind. We grow up and we know it's so many miles to Warsaw. We know it's so many miles to Krakow. We don't understand that it's 230 million miles to the sun. It just doesn't work. You know, it does not, we don't have an image of what that would be like. And we can't naturally imagine ourselves going 1,300 kilometers per second. It's just really fast. And these numbers are you know, boggling the mind. So it's going to take a while to get used to that stuff.
Yeah. Yes, that is true. That is true. And the moon is relatively close to Earth. So speaking about space, actually, we talk beyond the moon. Yeah, a moon is like 2 or 3 days, yeah, of travel from Earth. So it's you know, actually a voyage from Europe to America 500 years ago took sometimes 5 or 6 months, even, you know, or depending. Right. It took 100 years just to shorten it. To 1 month or 2 months even, and still it was quite a dangerous expedition, though. Absolutely. People who didn't make it simply didn't leave any traces of that. how hard it was. So that might be something like that. Do you agree with this concept that the space exploration will be exactly reminding us about the same world ocean revolution that occurred 500 years ago and completely changed the correlation of forces on our dear planet Earth, and actually ballooned Europeans to the heights of the global power?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And it really was the discovery of the New World and the age of exploration that did launch 500 years of, or close to it, of European dominance. I think it's going to be like that for the next age of exploration in the solar system. And I think it's going to be like that for really one reason, which is the immense wealth that's going to come back. These numbers are staggering on what kind of precious metals and important rare earth elements and things that are in just your average rock floating by. It's really unbelievable. And a lot of these are estimations, I know, but without a doubt, these things are going to be found. And unlike the 500-600 years ago voyages that were looking for converts to Christianity and gold and silver and new foods and stuff, this is going to be totally different in terms of just pure wealth. And that wealth has to go somewhere, and it's going to go to the Earth. And then we're going to see quite a bit of difference in terms of the scale of what our economy becomes. And that's going to propel even more exploration and even more technological revolution. I think you have a really good point about the speed of the voyages, that it only took 100 years to shorten the length of the first voyage, say, to the New World, and then only 100 years to go. And that's on the scale of people who were essentially in the Middle Ages with very limited technology. They had leather and iron and steel, and that's pretty much all they had. Now, today we have quite a bit more, and I think that the rate and the speed at which we can get out and explore these things, if the right incentive is there, which of course is economic discovery, I think that'll be much faster than 100 years. Maybe not a whole lot, but I think it'll be pretty good if that incentive is there. But it's also important to remember that the first voyages, much like ours back in 500, 600 years ago, are going to be government-led. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I do allude to that in the book. And the main real reason is the risk, just like it was 500, 600 years ago. It's very difficult for, say, a corporation or a company to put so much risk in a space voyage. And if it goes wrong, they essentially lose everything. But if it's the state, they don't lose everything. They just nationalize their debt and off they go to the next one.
Yeah. So what do you think about this new space, guys? Those barons, rich barons of space that are designing starships, other ways of, catapulting people into the cheap catapulting people into and cargo into space. What do you think about this trend?
Well, I think they're great. I like their innovation. I think the biggest thing I thought when I heard about these guys is, wow, what a Western answer to the space problem. Because on the other side of the world, in China, that stuff's not really happening. A lot of the space innovation is being led by state-funded corporations and state-funded enterprise. So it's a very different way of going about it, about space exploration and technological revolution than other governments would. So when you keep that in perspective, I think you realize that it's interesting, but it is, in the end of the day, it's very high risk for these companies. SpaceX and things like that. I mean, if they fail, they're out millions and millions of dollars. And, if they end up killing people in these experiments, nobody wants to go work for them anymore. It's much different than, say, the government, where people sign up willingly to be astronauts or space explorers and understand the risks and that sort of thing. So I applaud the efforts for sure. But to me, they also strike me as very fragile, even though they may not look like it.
Mm. That's true. Maybe that's why there will be a combination of Starship of Elon Musk and NASA and Pentagon, the U.S. Space Force. Last month there was an information announcement that the U.S. Transportation Command started talking to Elon Musk about the Starship being sort of a power projection platform to reach all places on Earth within 1 hour, and so to speak. So, who knows what's going to happen, so to speak. When I was analyzing the data on Starship how big the cargo bay will be. So for sure it can carry weapons. For sure it can carry, you know, a lot of that stuff into the orbit. And if there is an orbital refueling, as Musk is proposing, that would also change the grammar of warfare in space, so to speak.
Yep. Absolutely. I think. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, you go.
Yeah, I think we're going to gradually move, you know, from terrestrial fighting only, as in flying airplanes to get somewhere or sailing a ship to get somewhere, to this idea of what you might call orbital insertion, something coming from out of orbit or out of orbit over a country, and blam, it's there right away, and it only takes an hour or two. There is significant tactical flexibility there, and it's certainly surprising if the enemy is not ready for something like that. So yeah, I understand kind of what U.S. Transcom is thinking about. Now there's humanitarian applications too, right? So as soon as a flood or a famine or something horrible happens, help can be there almost immediately by using something like this. So like most technologies, I think it's important to remember that while the military stuff is fun and interesting, there are dual use applications. And so this could really serve to help a whole lot of people too.
Yeah. So, you know, what needs to happen in terms of the innovation, advancement in technology for your, you know, deep space warfare to materialize? So let's start talking about propulsion first.
Sure.
Okay, engines. What has to be invented just to make it happen? Just let's fantasize a little bit about it.
Yeah. So I purposely stayed away from this stuff because a lot of us people smarter than me talk about it. I wanted to talk about the strategy and the political philosophy, but that's fine. So obviously, yeah, we're going to need better stuff. We're going to need better engines. I think what we're going to need is a combination of really good tech and a higher tolerance of risk taking. That's something a lot of people don't think, and that is a pure human policy thing. Right now, I don't think we have it. I will say one of the criticisms I have for my own government and system is that we're still kind of think like, you know, and move in a Cold War fashion. When things are produced or when things are thought about or when things are ready to be developed, it takes about as long as it took in the 80s, you know, to get things going, but sometimes even longer. And I'm not the only guy in the military or government to have this criticism. So obviously that has to go. We got to be faster and sleeker and swifter with things that actually work. So yeah, if you want to talk about thrusters and speeds, let's see. I keep hearing every year that someone's just almost there with cold fusion. You know, I think it's right around the corner. But if we do actually end up getting that, that might be the power source we actually need to get going. Chemical engines are fine. You know, rocket engines we have now, they work, but they're not going to get you too far. Quite literally. And then you have certainly other fantastical things. Reusability is something that comes to mind because, you know, of course, the United States used to have the space shuttle, which was retired, and they're working on another, you know, reusable spacecraft. That's something that's important. But the fun part about this, the fantasizing, is that you can kind of go many different directions. And a lot of people have a lot of really good ideas, and they're all much smarter than me.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Your book is beginning with the introduction titled Warplane Orange. And already it took me an astonishment because I also studied Warplane Orange and I read this great book by Miller about Warplane Orange. And by the way, you are right now in Guam. It's early evening in the Western Pacific. So it's a very good setting for discussion about Warplane Orange. And you beautifully remind the reader that Warplane Orange was mainly, of course, about defeating Japan, but the way to do it was to conquer the tyranny of distance and plan for, you know, sort of long-haul, long-distance warfare, naval warfare. And that resembles, I understand this is how you try to compare the space warfare into this Warplane Orange. If you just could elaborate on that a little bit. That was a very interesting, you know, intro.
Absolutely, yeah. You hit the nail on the head. That is what I was after. And the Warplane Orange, of course, is just the for the person on here who might or who's watching who may not understand. It's just the plan, of course, that if the United States lost its possessions at the time in Western Pacific right away, as they were predicted to do during a war with Japan, how to reclaim those basically from sailing all the way from either California or Hawaii to go back. Yeah, and the themes, of course, are the long haul and the long distance, as you mentioned, and also the acceptance of attrition and casualties along the way. It's a long distance. There's a lot of ships you got to take with you, a lot of stuff. And then once you get there, you have to fight. So it's not like once you get there, you've reached the finish line, you can have a glass of water and a beer and you're done. It's once you get there is when the work actually begins. So that is something I wanted to kind of hammer home to the reader, that the voyages that we're going to do in space are just half the battle. And once you get to where you're going and to do what you're doing, that's also going to be risky and potentially very dangerous. And I think Warplane Orange was a fascinating look at that from a terrestrial example, and I had to put it in there. And I'm glad you studied it too. What did you think? Do you think the U.S. was right in their strategic calculations?
Yeah, but I also know that there were modifications to the Warplane Orange. Yeah, the Philippines
Yes.
were at the edge. So the first, and I remember vaguely that the first models were that you would be defending Philippines, and then you accepted loss of it, yeah, and that will be reconquered. I mean, recaptured, and that was a sort of this transformation. And you know, I was trying to compare it, by the way, to the air sea battle concept against China now, and about this, you know, the correlation of forces today. Okay, in a way, I was analyzing it very much in detail at that time, and still, you know, strategic assumptions still hold. Yeah, that was a very good plan to defeat Japan. I think I remember it was MacArthur or Nimitz who said that. I think Nimitz that at U.S. Naval War College. We exercised this Warplane Orange. We predicted everything except for kamikaze. So,
that's right. Yeah, Nimitz did say that. Who saw that one coming, right? Nobody. Yeah,
exactly. And kamikaze was nothing else. It was a sort of a crude cruise missile, yeah, so to speak.
Of course, absolutely. Yeah.
So it was not such a crazy idea in a way. However, that sounds maybe incorrect, politically incorrect. But basically, that was a concept, very effective, by the way, against the naval forces. Yeah.
Of course, absolutely.
Yeah, and that brings me to another question that I would like to ask you. During our conversation now and in your book, you focus a lot by stating that space warfare is more like a naval warfare. Today, you very much underline the need to be autonomous, just like a naval. I mean, you don't have constant communication with your center because it may be intercepted. You know, you're alone in darkness and in emptiness. This is how you train officers in Navy, and this is the same with the space. So how come, given that you're a U.S. Air Force, and the Air Force compared to that, say they jump and they land, you know, it's like 2 hours and back on Earth. Could you expand on that a little bit?
The command and control kind of thoughts. Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess I was jealous of the Navy because they have this freedom, quite frankly. Somebody's always calling me and telling me what to do. And when I'm flying my airplanes, you know, I always have 3 or 4 different radios and anyone can call me at any time and ruin my whole day. So really, it came down to the realities of the situation in space. It's really hard until you sit down and think about this, about the really big distances between here and wherever you're going or wherever there's a friend. There's just not going to be a whole lot of friends around or friendly bases or friendly things. And so you have to be ready to drive the ship on your own. And this is how terrestrial fleets used to function. You know, in the days of sail and high seas combat, a captain would leave a port with a sealed envelope that he wasn't even allowed to open until several days into the journey. And he'd look at it and he'd be very general, you know, go here, accomplish this job, do your best, see you later. That would be his orders. And he can do whatever he wants with it, or she. Well, at that time it was he only. That is, to me, it struck me as a perfect analog for space because we're going to be in the same situation once again. And so that's why I definitely wanted to drive that point home. And they're going to have to be okay with loneliness too. And not like there's no humans around, but like being very far from Mother Earth. It is going to be far, and the farther you go, the longer it's going to take to get back. So to be independent is something that's going to be important for any human that goes out there.
So how do you view this sort of so why did the U.S. Space Force then grow out of the U.S. Air Force then, and it's still somehow subject to to subordinated formally? Sure. So how is this sort of rivalry being sort of divulged? Just if you just could, I'm not sure if you can tell that, but if you might, that would be interesting.
I only have a few friends in the Space Force, and we're still friends, so all well so far. But the Space Force, I think, is very naturally grew out of the Air Force, just like we naturally grew out of the U.S. Army. I think it made a lot of sense. Of course, at the time of the Space Force's founding in December last year, the Air Force had all the satellites and all the space military stuff, so it makes perfect sense. But I don't think they've been around long enough to actually develop a rivalry. We're not there yet. But fascinating you ask is a lot of people in the Air Force were looking up, what it was like when we split off of the Army. What were the attitudes like? What were people thinking? What were they talking about? And I had no idea when I read a couple things from the late 40s when we split off of the Army that it was a very contentious, almost angry time. I had no idea that, the Army, the Air Force said, we're taking our stuff and leave and see ya, don't call us ever again. And so luckily it's not been like that with the U.S. Air Force and Space Force. We've been very friendly, at least so far. And nobody really knows quite what to make of the Space Force yet until they start really doing stuff. So it's fascinating. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, just judging from what they announced that they're doing, they're really focusing on the Earth orbit. But recently, with this Artemis Accords and Artemis program, suddenly, there are some hints or announcements that you need to protect communication lines to the moon, which takes you further. And you need to have assets to do it, sensors to monitor the situation in the cislunar. And there are some tenders already in the air about sensors there, and so on and so forth. And this is exactly what you are predicting in the book, that we are moving up into the even higher ground, always seeking the higher ground.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, I think it makes sense, because if someone can get higher than you, they can own whatever it is you have lower, and it's kind of a sad feeling. Not a sad feeling, not sad, but it's kind of intimidating, I guess is the word I would use. Especially because of the last probably 70 years of U.S. military dominance. Now we're in a spot where whoever gets there first, essentially, can take a significantly more dominant role. And that's uncomfortable to U.S. military professionals who are used to dominating. So I think that's why you're seeing the debates you are. And it's not a bad thing necessarily that people are thinking like this. It's good. It's a good strategic good strategic thinking, I think.
So who's going to be first on the moon, China or U.S. with a permanent base on the dark side?
We were already first. Oh, okay, a permanent base. All right. I think the answer lies in which government can utilize its resource the fastest. So what I've seen, and I alluded a little bit to it in the book, is that the U.S. is using kind of what we talked about already, this hybrid industry plus government research path to get whatever technology it needs to get up there. And whereas China is using a state-funded, more or less single line type way in research and development to get there. And I don't know which is more effective than the other, but we'll find out. I do think that Artemis is an excellent first step. It doesn't secure any kind of advantage unless it succeeds, at which point, it'll matter. But the fact that the U.S. is going back to the moon, and I'm happy to say we're going back to the moon, is a really important step, because it's going to take an incremental step, I think, to get a permanent moon base. There's still a lot of things we need to talk about. So there's still the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, of course, which both countries are signatories of, which says you can't claim and own things outside orbit. So that's going to have to be maneuvered around. And then there's the matter of how claims work overseas, or sorry, not overseas, out in outer space. Is it the same as Earth? Do you claim, say, between the Rhine and the Seine? Can you do stuff like that on the moon? The moon is very well diagrammed, and it's very well written out. And so there's places you can look up, mostly in Latin, what you can find on the moon. That's very well named. But other planets are not as well documented. So how do we deal with claims when we get up there? And how do you defend those claims? Is it going to be like the age of exploration where the first one who gets there gets to put the flag down and take it? I don't know. That's probably what will go first. I'm just guessing by human nature's record. But who knows? Yes, like we might see Artemis leave some stuff, maybe leave some fences on the moon when they're done and say, this is ours.
Exactly. So I'm just, of course, teasing you, bantering with you on purpose, as because your book is about, claiming that we are anarchical animals, and space will be just the same because this is, our nature. And right. Let's use the model that's used in the book to try to set out for a scenario, because it might happen within 7 years, not 100 years, about this moon thing. Sure. Are you expecting a competition, fierce competition, and also some elements of land warfare on surface of the moon and the craters on it? Because, it would be like China on the left side, US on the right side. Water is there, helium is there, our allies here, communication lines, transmission, also communication lines important, and so on and so forth. So there will be competition for sure. How would you, how would you approach it?
Yeah, I do expect fierce competition. We, of course, are already fiercely competing with China. I don't expect a Cold War. I think that's over the top because obviously we're still trading together. And I don't expect any kind of nuclear combat or anything of that scale. I think that's something neither country would benefit from, and I don't think there's a reason for that. I could even see a little bit of room for cooperation in terms of dire emergencies. Let's say one of these countries' spacecraft or facilities get into some big trouble. I wouldn't be against, or I don't foresee any reason why the other wouldn't help the other out in terms of some sort of evacuation or emergency procedure, short of actually helping them, live and all that. But so I think there's still room in the relationship for that. It's a complicated relationship, the Chinese and U.S., and it's still moving and changing, and it's going to change based on really a lot on the leadership of each country. China, authoritarian or not, each leader can't live forever, and each leader is going to change their mind, at time here and there. So, yeah, absolutely. I expect fierce competition. I don't know anything about Artemis. I don't think they have any plans to plant some stakes on the surface of the moon, but if they do, my point is that we shouldn't be surprised based on what humans do.
So true, so true. And the moon itself is a very interesting battlefield with craters and some places that actually you can see it on the dark side from the Earth. You need to control the communication points, Lagrange points on the other side of the moon. Who will control it? It's not a vast area. A competition will be there for sure. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
And the question is what the Chinese have, because they are so secret. And actually, they sort of know how to surprise people in the civil market. And I wonder how they could surprise us. Maybe just like the Japanese with the Pearl Harbor thing. And then, Space Pearl Harbor concept is very well known to you, right? Don Rumsfeld. It's a popular phrase in the U.S. space community, military community. Would you expect something like Space Pearl Harbor to really occur to the United States in the predictable future?
Right now, I wouldn't expect it. I guess that's the point of a Pearl Harbor. You don't expect it, but I don't think it's out of the question, and for any country, quite frankly. The notion of a surprise attack is something that is quite old and is not exclusively Asian, and it's not exclusively Western. And it does make good strategic sense, but it can't be squandered either or out of line. So let's not forget that Pearl Harbor was also the Japanese greatest strategic mistake. in the Second World War. Now, tactically, it was very well executed, very successful. But you can't forget there's a strategic implications to everything. So from what I can see, I don't know.
Okay. And maybe unpredictability of the future, it might be a good sign that we are still humans, even when we talk. And drawing slowly to the end of our conversation, and I'm speaking from Warsaw. You're on Guam. Could you tell people what it looks like on Guam in terms of weather, what it looks like in the Western Pacific, lonely in the big ocean? What it looks like, what's the weather, what is it like there?
Sure. Well, as you might imagine, it's tropical, a lot of palm trees, grass, that sort of thing. Guam is very much a rock in the middle of a giant, vast ocean. There's a couple rocks here. We have a couple islands north of us called Rota, Tinian, and Saipan, and a couple little tiny ones. It's beautiful for the most part. The cliffs are all very craggy and volcanic. A lot of beaches, of course. It has its share of danger, from sea creatures to very tall cliffs to there are a lot of coral reefs that you could step on and hurt yourself. But it's a nice place. It's there's not a lot of other places to go when you fly here, which makes it also a very strategic location. One note about Guam, and I think I mentioned it in the book, is that no amphibious landing has ever been resisted in the history of Guam. So it's something I think about from time to time.
I understand, but still, it's not that close to Asian mainland, though, which is not that bad altogether, right? Yeah, but right. It is true. Okay, John, thank you very much. That has been a wonderful discussion, very informative for the audience, and of course, I'll show it again.
Thanks very much.
It's a great book, must read for everybody who really wants to know something about space. And this is really something, deep knowledge about the deep space warfare. Thank you very much. Stay tuned, stay with us. Strategy and Future. My guest today was John C. Wright from Guam. And my name is Jacek Bartosiak. Take care. See you soon.
Thank you, Jacek.